Wonderful to see this assembly of friends, members of our board, Feroza, Sangeeta, our Arts Advisory Council, Tasneem, it's lovely to have you here with us, and members of our community at large, all here to celebrate the wonderful arc of your journey, Hoor. And what does one say about Hoor? I know Ketki's already given you an introduction, but from directing a year-round biennale, a year-round foundation program, to curating a slew of biennales, including Sharjah's own, one that has grown significantly and represents over 150 artists from over 70 countries and includes art, film, programs spread across 19 venues in 5 cities across the Emirate of Sharjah, with invitations to every talk, show, and event worth its salt in the global arts space, as well as leading a university project, an institute, and a fashion brand. The question of limited time and virtuosic work seems from the outset to be a part of the magic of our guest this evening, Hoor Al-Qasimi. Hoor, welcome to India. Thank you for honoring my request and joining us this evening. We're deeply honored to launch Asia Society's Trailblazers series with you, a series that features artists and creative practitioners who have been transformational in their practice, and you embody that in so many different ways. And of course, we couldn't have asked for a better way to launch the art season in the city, close on the heels of the 2nd edition of Mumbai's Art Fair, Art Mumbai, led by Minal and Dinesh Vazirani. I'm missing Dinesh. Where is he? He's on his way. Okay. We're delighted, of course, to be hosting this conversation at IFPI, which is Ice Factory Ballad Estate, originally a 140-year-old ice factory. The space has been re-envisioned as a space for encounters, merging art, exhibitions, performances, and food within this beautifully restored structure centered around a large banyan tree outside Hoor. And I'm thinking about the Kalba Ice Factory and the magical ways in which the universe connects the dots. I know that there's just too wide and expansive a ground for us to cover today, but I'd like to start, if I may, at the beginning. How does one build up the context to make all that you do and have achieved? The skills, the team, the work ethic that scaffolds such a busy calendar. Where did it all start? Who were your early influences? You were born in privilege, but you grew up at a time when the cultural renaissance that we now see in West Asia hadn't become as pervasive. In fact, Sharjah was really the first mover in driving this cultural consciousness in the region under the leadership of your father, who I understand is a historian and an academic. Tell us a little bit, Hoor, about your growing up years, dinner table conversations. Were there experiences that in retrospect laid the groundwork or hinted at the possibility of this future?
I hope this works. Yeah? Is it working? No? You can hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Okay. Thank you, and actually thank you everyone for being here. Before I answer any question, technically it's not, our factory is not an ice factory, it's a fish feed factory that was never used as a fish feed factory, but the fishermen stored ice and it was called the ice factory. So we decided to call it the ice factory because that's what the people called it. And I still have these conversations with my dad that it's technically not an ice factory, but
Thank you for that.
It's loved as an ice factory. We do have another ice factory in Dibba, but that still needs time. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for bringing me back to Mumbai and to India. I feel a little bit ashamed. I haven't been here in a long time, but it's good to be back. It's true that we're all privileged to be here. I can't have the mic and not send out my thoughts to the people in Palestine and Lebanon and Sudan and the Congo and anywhere where people are facing a genocide. We're very privileged to be even alive at this time. And it's very hard to continue doing what you do and seeing the purpose of it. But what I believe art and culture can do is to bring people together, because with us coming together, we're stronger, we're more united, and hopefully we could create a safer and better future for the next generations. I think we have a responsibility. We have a role and a responsibility, and I think that's why I'm never too busy. I think I'm very lucky and privileged to have access to many platforms. So if I get invited or nominated to do something, I'll work my hardest to get it, because it's very rare that a brown woman gets these opportunities. And when I go there, I take everyone with me.
Amazing. Would you like to share a little bit about your early years and
well, my early years
growing
were,
up in Sharjah with your family?
My early years were very much school, and after school activities. That was my mother's push for us. Growing up in Sharjah, the only activities I would see would be the book fair, the Biennale, the theater. Yeah, the first time I saw Russian ballet was in Sharjah, Shakespeare was in Sharjah. Everything that I learned about art and culture was in Sharjah. But that's what we knew, that's all we did. If we weren't in school, we did that. And we had after-school activities, art, music, everything that people were expected to do. So it was difficult for me to try and figure out what I wanted to do. My father was his bachelor's was in agricultural engineering. So he tried to push me to go into agricultural engineering, which I thought I would do. But all the plants would die around me. I said, I'm sorry, Dad, I don't have a green thumb, and I just don't work very well with nature or with plants. So I knew that wasn't for me. But I was always in the art room. I did want to be a chef, but in the 90s it wasn't, did you want to be a cook? Yeah, you want to be a cook. So I wanted to go into furniture design, and I used to spend afternoons with a carpenter making chairs out of wood. So again, my mother said, you want to be a carpenter? And then I thought I'd be an architect. And I worked towards that until my final year, and my art teacher said, no, you're going to art school. He said, you're going to end up building towers in Dubai. That's not for you. Because that's what we were seeing happening next door. This was in the late 90s. So I said, okay, but I didn't know that there was an opportunity to study art. We didn't have that possibility at that time. And I applied to many places. I applied to Glasgow and London, and I ended up going to study painting in London. Yeah. So that was in a nutshell. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you took over the leadership of the Sharjah Biennale in its 6th edition in 2003. And the Sharjah Foundation grew out of the biennial in 2009. You've said that the foundation partly served to meet the needs of the in-between years, when the biennale, when the biennial ran the risk of losing its audience and disrupting the sustained growth of the arts ecosystem you were trying to create in the region. I'd love to know more about that. But you're also involved with so many projects, Hoor. You've got the Global Studies University, the Africa Institute, for example. And I know that the foundation was filling a gap in the artistic space, while the university and institute are based in academia. So I'm curious to understand the community response to these different things at the local and the regional level, and as well as your priorities and approach around them. And just a related question to this, because I think you've become, you sort of, what do you find exciting about institution building? Because you do it all the time. How do you map the relationship between the capacity to dream big, to sell that vision, and then to mobilize resources? Does a formal shape, the constraints and compromises come after the organic and boundless idea? I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I have to say, nothing I've done has come out of nowhere. You know, everything has been there before me. So Sharjah Biennial was there before me. The Africa Institute came out of Africa Hall. So in 1976, there was a hall built in Sharjah called Africa Hall. And it was demolished later, and my father was rebuilding Africa Hall, and it got me thinking, what happened to Africa Hall? We grew up with this building that hosted all cultural events. It had major Arab poets, Nizar Qabbani, everybody spoke at this hall. But I didn't understand why was it called Africa Hall. So I started doing my research, or I could have just asked my father, but I went to the archives and newspapers. And the first conference to take place in this hall was on African-Arab relations. And I contacted my colleague, a curator I worked with from Sudan, Salah Hassan, who's in Cornell, and I said, oh, I'm interested in knowing more about this conference. And he found a report on the conference in an American journal, the African Studies Association journal. They had sent someone to Sharjah in 1976 to report on this conference. And in the report, there was a recommendation to set up an institute. So 40 years later, I said to my dad, look, why don't we set up this institute, but instead of only African-Arab relations, it's African diaspora studies, and we can have a section on African-Arab relations. So he was saying, oh, I remember like this like it was yesterday. So we started planning it. And actually the name, the Africa Institute, came from Okwi, because when Salah and I met with Okwi, talking to him about this amazing new institute we're doing called the Institute of African and African Diaspora Studies. And he said, whoa, the Africa Institute. So I have to give credit to Okwi for the title, for the name. But you know, as I said, nothing comes out of nowhere. There's many histories behind every project that I do, and it takes me to Okwi's biennial, thinking historically in the present. I think that's how I work. I often reflect on what my father's done and my father's history. My father grew up under the British occupation. So for him, it was always about writing our own histories and taking ownership of our stories. So he's been collecting archives, he's been documenting, writing books, hosting exhibitions, you know, historic exhibitions on maritime and Islamic civilization. So for me, I feel like I'm doing something similar, but through contemporary art. And I also think art and culture can transcend these kind of boundaries of geographies, when so much of our histories has been about dividing us. I think we can do so much to reconnect. And you can see it with the next generation. They don't want these divisions anymore. And I think we have, there's so much opportunities to kind of connect through projects. So for me, it's really important to have, the Africa Institute. And when I was working on the Lahore Biennale, I started planning this Asia Institute and then Oceania Institute. So I started planning all these different institutes that we're working on. But to work on accreditation for masters and PhD is a long process. So we created the Global Studies University, which is the umbrella university that will be giving out the degrees. So the Africa Institute has been running now since 2018, but we'll hopefully we've had fellowships and other programs, but we'll have our first batch of students next year.
Fabulous. I want to shift gears a little bit. We live in a moment now where South-South exchange is increasingly valued in the mainstream. But what has it been like for you over the years, championing local and regional conversations. I'd like you to speak to us about what it must have taken, the consistent efforts that went into setting up new hubs of discourse in the 2000s via either a reimagined biennial or the March meetings in Sharjah. Were there moments of friction, frustration that demanded perseverance, especially once you pushed back against every global conversation about knowledge and art by default, having to go through cities like New York or London?
Always, always. It was very hard because when I started, I was 22. And in Sharjah, it was okay because they thought, okay, she's the daughter of the ruler, we'll make her the director, she can be happy. But I wanted to change a lot of things, so I started questioning a lot of things. And the committee that were organizing it were artists of an older generation. Many of them passed away now. And they said, do it yourself. But at 22, of course I'm going to do it. I'm going to clean the floor, I'm going to stick the labels. I was running around with a spirit level. And I worked with artists and technicians, and we put it up. But the surprise I had was that people that were coming from the outside, artists who I've been communicating with on email, for example. I remember a Korean artist came and said, "You're the director, I expected an old man." And I felt that no matter how hard I work, I have to prove myself, because they'll think, nobody will think that I was doing the work. They'll always think, oh, she's just the daughter of. So I struggled. I went back to art school, and I thought, I need a degree, I need it, but I don't need it. But I need something to prove that I can do it. And it was very difficult. And I have to say, I got a lot of this insecurity from the West because I wasn't a man and I was young. So I felt for the longest time, probably until, I don't know, last year or this year, that I still feel like I have to prove myself. But at one point, I think you learn so much from everybody you work with. I've learned from every artist, every curator, every person in this room that I know. You realize that you're doing the same thing, so you're in a familiar territory. And there was one journalist in the last biennial, the German journalist, was very excited, taking pictures of everything, like really over the top. And then in March, they said he wants to interview you. And he's like, oh yeah, it was great, but you're not a democracy. So he pushed me 20 years back. I said, you know what? I'm sick and tired of white German men coming to tell me who I am. I said, 20 years ago, I had this, and now you took me back 20 years. And he said, no, 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 this is our ignorance and what we don't know. I said, you visited the show. And I said to him, look, if it's a democracy this was March 2023, it was after Documenta. I said, if it's a democracy not to be able to boycott Israel or support Palestine, you can keep that democracy. And if it's a democracy to send people to Rwanda, you can keep your democracy. I was so fed up. He really pushed me because I realized that we have come a long way, but they haven't. So then I was apologizing. He said, don't apologize. I said, you triggered me, really triggered me. But I feel like as many people understand, there's still the few who, no matter how hard you try, they'll still look at you and stereotype you and put you in the bubble that they want to put you in. But it's fine, because that's their problem. Yeah.
But you raise a really important point, and I want to stick with this for a moment. A current that I think, like you just mentioned, that's flown through your professional life is this question of history, right? Who does the writing? Who gets represented? And how these affect our ability to imagine places, both our own and those of others. The movie and book that you're about the resistance of Khurfakhan is but one example that your historian father has spent decades sort of rehabilitating distorted narratives, distorted Western narratives of Sharjah, and emancipating its memory as a center of maritime trade. And On a more intimate level, speaking of your own early experiences in college and the art world, when a range of words like Arab or woman had used stereotyped upon arrival.
They
right?
used Islamic on me.
Okay.
Which was
Islamic. Burdened with a mountain of associations you might not have embraced yourself. I know that you once said, Hoor, and I read it somewhere, that as you put yourself in the position of a brown or Arab woman, you're already on that side where you need to write your history because it's not written for you. Can you tell us more about how you approach history and representation in professional life and in your curatorial endeavors now, and the ways these often engage questions of place, belonging, and identity?
Okay, it's a long question. Well, for me, it's always, I think you have to connect your history to know where you are, where you're going. And I think, I'll give you an example. I was working in Cuba last year in April. I worked with a project with an Argentinian artist, and she worked with people aged 65 to 90. And it was a performance where people would sit together and they would talk about their many lives and all the jobs that they did in Cuba. You know, everywhere they went, to Angola, and people would come in their uniform, they would bring photographs. And when we did the initial interview to ask people who would want to participate, they said that when Obama came to visit them, he told them they should forget their history and that they should start a new page. And they were very angry about this. And I think there's always this desire to erase histories, to say, let's start new. But you can't start new. You have to know where you come from so that you know how to continue. And I think that's something that is really important. I feel that that's why when I get invited to work in cities, I want to work with locals. You know, I don't want to come from the outside and parachute in, because I learned so much about their histories and what they're going through. I say Cuba as an example because what Cuba is going through right now is horrendous. You know, I worked with groups of children in a town in the city of Matanzas, in a neighborhood called La Marina. And I think about them, you know, with all these power cuts that are happening right now, and the lack of resources. So I think, yeah, history has to be rewritten for sure, but it can be rewritten in many ways. It can be rewritten through the stories of our families that nobody gets to hear. It can be rewritten through, you know, testimonies of people who've been imprisoned who never get their stories told. So I think that's why art is such an important tool, because artists do that work. Artists make the time, they do the research, they do connect. And through contemporary art, you can connect, you can talk about these histories that are often forgotten or actually, not forgotten, but kind of forced to be silenced, yeah.
That's incredible, and it's amazing how you've been doing that. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit right now. And you've worked extensively with artists from India. For example, at the Lahore Biennale in 2020, and of course across multiple editions of the Sharjah Biennial. And I know we have several artists here who've participated in the Sharjah Biennial. And you've said about Sharjah that it was important for you to invite interesting and dynamic Indian artists because you have a huge South Asian community. I would love to hear more of your thoughts on Indian art, on artists that you worked with, any trends that you've noticed, or occasions when work coming out of India has sparked new conversations about post-colonial history and representation. And what place does India itself hold in your trajectory, Hoor, in the context of growing up in Sharjah, possibly sharing spaces with Indian thinkers, scholars, curators, and artists in terms of a shared history of cultural aesthetics and dialogue?
Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, I don't follow trends, so I don't know what trends are happening. But I have worked with many Indian artists, but I haven't spent enough time in India, so I can't say that I've done enough research for sure.
You've got to change that.
I have to change that, yes,
yeah.
that's why I'm here again. But India, of course, is very important. Historically, the connections between India and Sharjah are very important. Also, that the Royal Air Force, the British Royal Air Force, was based in Sharjah on their way to India as a stop. There was like a whole history and a connection there. So I think definitely half our population is South Asian in the UAE, about half. So I grew up very much in a place, I mean, I went to an international school, so my school was very diverse and mixed. India's so close to Sharjah that the food is, our food is biryani. Our food is the same, our spices are the same. We also took some Hindi words and put it in our language. So I think it's very, very important that we make these connections. My mom's generation, my dad's generation, they all speak Hindi and Urdu. Our generation, not so much. But I think, yeah, it's time to change that. I think most of the artists that I've worked with are so different in India. I wouldn't say it's a trend because I connect with each artist practice differently. But also I don't try to group artists regionally as well. Each practice is very specific. And yes, I've worked with many Indian artists and I thank all of them for being here and their gallerists for the wonderful work that they do to represent them also in every art fair and international stage. I know it's very difficult for artists to get visibility. I have that, like in Japan, not many people know about Japanese artists or Australian artists, and I think the work that the galleries are doing in India has been great. And in Frieze, I was with the CEO of the Sydney Biennale, and she told everyone, Hoor took me to every Indian gallery, every Indian gallerist booth at Frieze, because it was a really great representation. So, yeah, thank you guys.
A big round of applause to all the gallerists in the audience. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that I know you're asked all the time, but I think it's deeply important. Thinking about diverse post-colonial constellations, what was it like getting to engage with the late Nigerian curator, Okwe Enwezor? You've placed an early experience at Documenta 11, curated by him, as this transformative, pivotal sort of moment in your trajectory. Would you share what shifted for you at Documenta? And one of the things that Enwezor emphasized, and which I personally find very inspiring, is that an art exhibition matters as much for the discourse it produces as for the works it presents. And I think more than half of his Documenta's 117 artists hailed from the developing world. How did his approach to curation change you, Hoor? And since it's been over a year now, how would you reflect on Sharjah Biennale 15, thinking historically in the present, which you realized in dialogue with him?
So yeah, for me, as I was fresh out of art school, I graduated from the Slade with my bachelor's, and I got accepted to the Royal Academy to do my master's. And for some reason, I still don't know why, I asked them if I could defer my entry by a year. I still don't know why I did it, because it's very unlike me. I refused to do a foundation course just so I can go to my BA. But something was telling me just defer a year. So I deferred a year, and I ended up in Germany with my father in Berlin, and then he left, and he said, stay in Berlin, it's much cooler. And I stayed, and someone said, you should go see Documenta. It was Britta Schmidt, who was at Hamburger Bahnhof at the time. I didn't know what Documenta was. I didn't know any Biennale outside of Sharjah Biennial. I've seen, I went to MoMA and whatever, but Biennales, I only knew Sharjah. So when I visited this exhibition, I was on my own, and I suddenly saw an exhibition that was thematic, political, and as you said, works from a lot of artists from South Africa, Santu Mofokeng, Zuletum Tetwa, artists from Palestine, Rul Halawani. So there was something there, and I started thinking about the biennial in Sharjah, and I was always interested in exhibitions. I co-curated my first show when I was 17 in Sharjah, so I was interested in exhibition making. But I wanted to understand why our biennial wasn't a curated exhibition, and why were we stuck in a country representation model when people were coming from so many places. I thought of one artist at the time who passed away now, Tariq Al-Hussein. He was one of the artists who really made me question, because he was a Palestinian, Kuwaiti, American in Sharjah.
Amazing.
And I thought, like, what do I do with you, Tariq? Where do I put you? And I said to them, like, can we just get rid of this pavilion idea? And we were in a trade center, and it looked like an art fair. There were booths. So again, I was like, we have a museum, we have an arts area, we have outdoor spaces. So I started questioning these things, because there's something that I felt going around Documenta that I felt we needed to embrace. It wasn't Documenta as a place, but it was Okwi's exhibition. And one thing that I thought of is that I felt privileged that I could go to Germany and see this. But what about people who live closer to home and can't make this trip? They need to see something like this. And that became really the shift. And I didn't know Okwi at the time. I met him years later. He came to Sharjah Biennial 7 as Sharjah Biennial 7 as jury member. And he always supported the work that we did. Like, whenever we had some controversy or drama, he was just like, don't worry, you're fine. And he always backed us up, and he believed in what we were doing. So when it was time for the 30th biennial, 30 years of Sharjah Biennial, I tried to invite the curators early, because the paperwork takes time, and they need time to think. So in 2018, I was thinking of the 2021 biennial. And I was in Senegal, in Dakar, with Salah. Salah was on the other side of the lecture theater, and I was on one side, and the speeches take so long. So I was texting him on WhatsApp. I was saying, I'm thinking about Sharjah Biennial 15, and I can't get Okwi out of my head. Do you think he'd do it? Because we knew he was very sick. I was with him in Venice when I did the UAE Pavilion. He did the Venice exhibition. So there were all these moments of intersection. But I didn't know if he would do it. And he said, just go ask him. And he said to me, yes, he would do it. And he had all these amazing ideas. And he sent me the title, Thinking Historically in the Present. Unfortunately, he passed before we got a lot done. He had many ideas. He wanted to do his exhibition on the post-colonial constellation as a historic show, and then invite 30 new commissions for the biennial. So that was his idea. And he only had one artist listed in the 30 commissions. So for me, what happened was, after he passed away, I thought, okay, how am I going to make decisions? Let me bring a group of people who are close to him, just so we can think together. And then the pandemic hit. So everyone said, you can't do a historic show. Nobody's gonna ship works. There's nobody looking at, there are no registrars at the moment. Shipping is expensive. So there were all these things happening. And I realized, okay, maybe it doesn't have to be Okwi's show, but it could be a homage to Okwi. Thinking about his post-colonial keywords that he sent, and then inviting artists that he worked with, that I worked with, that we both worked with, and none of us worked with. And I postponed it by 2 years. That's my excuse for having a big show. It's a two biennials in one. So it took us, with all the dramas with the pandemic and Okwi passing, it took us 4 years to do that show. Yeah.
And what an incredible show that was. I mean, but you know, just to sort of take that conversation that we were having a little while ago about rewriting history. The word the word decentering is often used with you, right? And you know, the decentering you're known for, Hoor, goes beyond the Western idea of the Orient in history. You bring this philosophy to the cities you work in by extending the biennials you direct. Most obviously in Sharjah, just beyond a central venue in a metropolitan hub. Instead, art, exhibition space, and programming proliferate to cover many parts of a place from your perspective. As a curator of the second Lahore Biennial, you positioned work all over the city of Lahore. And in Sharjah, you have elements of the show in every town and on each coast. Tell us why it is important for you to decenter the traditional gallery as the primary site for aesthetic experiences. And how does this connect to the question that I think all curators and directors must ask themselves on who is my first audience? What does it mean for the first audience to not necessarily be the professional art critic or academic, but the inhabitants who make up the day-to-day landscape of a place?
Well, nearly every city in Sharjah. I wanted to do a sixth one. My team didn't let me. They said, no way.
Right.
Al-Madam. There's a town, Al-Madam. Maybe it's not in this one, but maybe in a future one. It's very important. And for me, I also like it's important not to have just one artist really far away. It's important to have a show, like a lot of artists together, because then people make the effort to go. But then there are people that live in that area as well. When the team started calling them off-sites, I never get angry, but I got really angry. I said, they're not called off-sites. I banned the word off-sites at this office. Every space is as important as the other. Everything has, has a unique space, like the factory or the studios or whatever. Everything has its own feeling, but also there's a community that live there. For example, in Hamriya, you have people coming from Al-Qaywain and Ajman. It's right there on the doorstep. For Kalba, you have people coming from Fujairah, from Oman, from Khorfakan. So it's closer to a lot of people. Al-Zayd, it's closer to where we all live than Sharjah City. Sharjah City is now a little bit further. So it's really important. And sometimes I have artists who say, no, I want to be in the city center. I want to be in those spaces. Or you have curators who say, no, I can't do that, it's too far. Now I have 5 curators. Nobody can, they can divide the spaces
This is for the next iteration.
For the next edition, 5.
Yes, yeah.
So it's important that each town, because I realize how much pride the town feels of this biennial being there, and how much they love having the biennial there and being part of it. Also, because we're a public institution, we're a government foundation, our audience is the public first. If we don't serve the public, then what are we doing? It's their money, it's public money, so it has to be for them. And it takes years to show, like to make people want to visit these spaces. Like now everybody knows Kalba Ice Factory because we've used it in many editions. But we also have art centers in nearly every town, in 9 towns in Sharjah, where we teach drawing. We teach drawing, painting, calligraphy, ceramics, performance, whatever, lots of workshops. So these centers are already in different towns, and that is a big part of our project, is working with local communities and hiring also from local communities.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I find in Sharjah the people own the biennial. It's our biennial, and there is I think I remember reading somewhere where at one of the exhibition spaces, locals began calling the buildings there the Art Square.
Oh yeah, the Art Square has been known as the Art Square for ages, but Al-Zayd, there's an old palace there. They called it the Arts Palace, and they called that the Art Square there, and in Al-Zayd too, yeah. yeah, they love it.
You've, again, I'm going to pivot to a slightly different thing, and I think you alluded to this in the beginning. You've said in interviews that at 14 you wanted to be a chef. Around the same time you worked, you said, with the local carpenter, prompting your mother to wonder if woodwork is where your passion lay. For a while you were compelled by the field of architecture. And while the world is grateful that you turned to curation, over the years, many of these earlier interests have re-entered your orbit, notably architecture and the lived history of buildings which the foundation has activated. The story of the Africa Hall in Sharjah is another example where research into a structure set off a whole new academic program. But then you're also a restaurateur, and you have with both Fen and Abayomi restaurants, which are a testament to your culinary ambitions. And then there is the fashion line Qasimi, which is a shared project with your late brother, and you continue to grow it in his memory. And in 2022, you launched a new talent incubator program. Talk to us about these varied and multifaceted passions. What place do each of these hold in your life, and what keeps them compelling? And how do they influence your curatorial and, let's say, primary professional work? Is it a matter of rest and respite from the hectic art world? Or is it a way of keeping one's eyes fresh, looking constantly beyond the frame of a single field?
No, it's more stress, for sure. No rest. I would say the restaurant, I'm not a good business person, I have to say, because people keep telling me, open in Dubai Airport, open in Dubai Mall. Like, no. I'm opening in the art spaces because people need good food there. But the footfall, but no restaurateur wants to open in art spaces because the footfall is very uneven. So I try to stick to that. I did open one on the mountaintop in Khorfakan, so that helps me keep going. That's a tourist location, so that's fine. But it's important for me that when people go to see an exhibition, they have good food. And then Abayomi, I opened as a response to the Africa Institute, bringing African cuisine. Nothing is fusion. Everything is authentic, maybe less greasy, but everything is authentic with local ingredients as much as possible. And yeah, just to introduce, the culinary diversity that exists, and so that's something that I'm always interested in as well. But under the umbrella of arts, you can bring in food and everything. With the fashion label, it was my twin brother was a fashion designer. He passed away in 2019. Before he passed away, him and I, we also launched the Architecture Triennale. He was interested, he set up the Urban Planning Council in Sharjah. And I thought, together we thought it would be great to do an architecture triennial and to have it, I didn't want it under the Art Foundation because I wanted architecture to connect to the city and urban planning. And I thought, I could have also another arm in another location to help me save some more buildings that I couldn't save on this side. And I thought through urban planning we could do so much more. And I remember him telling me that, but it's so hard. I'm running the label in London, and and I'm doing the Urban Planning Council. And I said, look, I've done biennials. I can help you. We can do this. Unfortunately, he passed away before the first edition, and I continued the work. We've had 2 editions of the triennial. The last one, 2023. So we have the 3rd one coming up soon. And with the fashion label, it's a little bit hard for me, I have to say. I'm working, the team are pushing me to do things like a lot of events. We're going to come back to Mumbai as well to do something with the Qasimi Rising, the Q Rising event. So we'll let you know. But it's a talent incubator to also support young designers and talent. Because for me, the commercial side is always hard. I don't like competition. I think now, especially now, I think most people don't want to compete anymore. People want to share resources and want to come together. Like everybody's struggling. So I find the business side of things very difficult. Most of the work that I do is non-profit. So the fashion side, I like the incubator and the programs around that, but the business side sometimes I find very draining. Yeah.
You know, Hoor, a question that I think is top of mind for many in the audience, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how are you reading the world right now, about the pressures on art and solidarity, and I know you started the conversation with alluding to that. And what role do you feel aesthetic and critical practices can serve in a moment of climatic and socio-political upheaval? And returning to your own curatorial engagements, and you have many, speak to us about what's in store in terms of the biennales to come. What might we expect in Sharjah 2025, which you said is being curated by 5 women curators? And also perhaps the ones that you're curating in Aichi in Japan, in Sydney. You said you just finished doing something in Matanzas in Cuba. Are these a part of an expansive but shared tapestry of ideas about how to see the world and how to live in it? And does the biennial form, as you have come to make it, allowing for far more flexibilities and responsiveness to current events and its rootedness in localities and community, more urgent than ever before when it comes to imagining art in and of the world?
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, a biennial is anything you want it to be. I think that's important. When people talk about, do we need biennials, or is a biennial this and that? Biennials can be anything. In Matanzas, I did 5 projects. I had some people say, "I'll come and see your exhibition later." I said, "There's no exhibition. I have 5 happenings. There are 5 projects with the community, and that's it. And that's all it has to be." What I did in Tunis was also very different. So it's very much whatever makes sense for the place. It doesn't have to be 170 artists or 200 artists. It can be 5 artists. And I think that's the flexibility of what it is. With regards to what I see the world today, I think the world is in a mess completely. But that's more so than ever. We can't give up, because the easy route would be to give up. I check on my friends in Lebanon and Palestine all the time. I feel almost guilty for going on and checking, and I check on them, and then they say, "It's okay, just pray for us." We have to do more than just pray for them. We have to speak for them. I know many people are scared to speak. They're scared of being canceled. But if you are able to say something publicly or not publicly, you do what you can, and I think that's the most important thing. I think to turn a blind eye to what is happening is the worst injustice you could do. And as we've seen in history, history is going to judge everybody. If you did something, if you said something, or if you acted, or if you didn't. We need to learn from what happened in South Africa. We need to learn from people like Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, who was called a terrorist. And I think all these histories are connected, and we can't forget one and just isolate the other. So through these projects, that's what I'm hoping to do, to bring the conversation, to make these connections. At the end of the day, we all suffered and are suffering from the same things that are controlling the planet and controlling the world. People talk about, "Oh, is it sustainable to do this exhibition?" I said, look, I could think about if I should build a false wall or not, but the white phosphorus bombs that are dropping on my friends in Lebanon are what's killing the planet. And I think it's important to say that back. People talk about, I'm going to recycle this bottle. But what are the wars doing? What damage are the wars doing? And I think that's really important to keep into context. I'm not saying don't recycle the bottle, recycle your bottle, reuse your bottle. But at the same time, it's greater than what you can do as a person. It's what you could do collectively.
And do you think the art world is doing enough?
No. We need to do more. I think we need to do more. I think artists are speaking up. Artists have been called the problem. I was with some people somewhere, and they said, artists are the problem. And I said, well, with no artists, you don't have an exhibition. I think artists have been very supportive. They've spoken up. They've risked a lot of intimidation from collectors, from institutions. They've lost jobs. They've lost projects. And when I was in Bogota, November 2023, I was on a panel, and I said, you know, that it's our responsibility to support all these people. You know, we're a community. Our friends are losing positions because they've spoken up against genocide. We need to work together to support them. You know, we need to show that, you know, one artist's project got canceled. Okay, I'm going to show the project in my exhibition. It's important. We need to talk to each other.
I couldn't agree more. And before I open this out for questions from the audience, and I'm sure there'll be quite a few, Hoor, I know we've covered the arc of your journey, the many successes that you've had. Could you share a little bit about your experiences with failure?
There's no room for failure. No. I try my best. I mean, but we learn from our mistakes. We've had many mistakes. You know, we've had controversies and this and that. Of course, you learn from them. But you just have to keep going. I think the important thing is not to feel that you come to a place or to a position where you know everything. I remember some points when somebody said to me, oh, I have a PhD and you want me to work for him, somebody like that. And I said, don't throw your PhD in my face. I started this job at 22 painter, at the age of 22 and a painter. You know, like, I feel like it's really important to not feel like you know everything, because you could have multiple PhDs, but you have no social skills and you don't know how to work with people. And that's something that I've realized with certain people. They have great academic careers, but when they come to work in an institution, they don't know how to work with people. So I think it's important not to feel that you know everything. I think it's important to say you don't know something, because if you pretend to know something and you don't, you get called out, and then you embarrass yourself on the stage.